killed the Minotaur on my first try, right? How hard could this be?
Hello and welcome to the All Good Stories podcast, where we believe all good stories belong to Jesus. And when we look for Jesus in the stories around us, we find him more fully in our own. We're your hosts, Chris Bowden
and Simon Campbell, two millennial dads who love pop culture and making connections from the content we love to the God who loves us.
And in episode 5, we're continuing our quest through the TV series Percy Jackson and the Olympians. So if you missed episode 4, we encourage you to go back and then hop back into this one as we continue on with our forbidden hero and the doom that awaits him in Percy Jackson Part 2. All right, Simon, welcome back to Percy Jackson and the Olympians, episodes 4 through 8. One of your all-time favorite books, one of your all-time worst movies back in the early 2000s.
But we've walked down Redemption Road. This has been a wild ride, but we've made it, and it was great. Yeah, they stuck the landing even.
That's right. Here's the tell right on the front end. We think it's a great story. We have got a lot of ground to cover here. We've got 5 jam-packed episodes. So Simon, catch us back up and help keep us on track here of where we're headed.
Yeah, so where we are in this series is Percy Jackson and fellow half-blood Annabeth Chase and a satyr named Grover are midway through their quest. They've been making their way across the country from New York to Los Angeles, and as they're going along, they're running into even more menacing monsters that threaten their very survival. In addition to that, we see multiple encounters with many of the Greek gods along the way, and all the while, Percy and his friends are dealing with the implications of being connected as family to the gods and discover their own strength as heroes. And the series comes to this dramatic conclusion where they return the stolen items of power and uncover a deeper, more ominous plot that reveals the true enemies of Olympus.
Ooh, wow. It's like you stole that from the back of a DVD case.
Yeah, all I needed was that trailer voice.
Yeah, well, there were only one hero.
Coming on December 25th. Yeah.
It was a really good synopsis, though. Simon, way to give us a recap without blowing all the spoilers out of the water there, but I think it's also time for an apparent spoiler alert from here because we are going to dive right in. And to start, we're just going to start with some movie magic, so some details and nuances, whether it's in cinematography or production or artistic choices or themes that we just love to nerd out around. And so one of the very first ones for me that I love in this story in general, and we may have mentioned it in the last episode, is just taking these common, ordinary things to us and blending them or hiding them in with the supernatural. For example, you have the St. Louis Arch, which just so happens to be this shrine, if you will, to the goddess Athena. It's held up by symmetry. Right. It's held up by math. And so it's set up
an architectural marvel,
That's right, to be devoted to her. And we have all the action takes part in this. Or the reality of like, hey, this is a sanctuary. This is a safe spot because of that in our story. And then we go to the Lotus Casino in Vegas, the home of Hermes, which for me is super fun. My wife and I love going out to Las Vegas. She has family out in that area, and we know in the casinos that it is ding-dang intentional that there are no windows in the joint anywhere.
Clocks. No sense of time.
That's right. And I just love that hiding in this idea with Hermes of like, yes, we're entering into the land where time doesn't exist, and we get lost and we forget, which I'm not sure I remember the exact reference, but I immediately went like, this has to be an Iliad or Odyssey reference of people getting trapped on a journey.
Yeah, so I think it was the Isle of the Lotus or whatever, where Odysseus goes to the island and eats the lotus flowers and
literally the lotus reference. Okay, perfect.
Yes, their companions lose track of time, lose their minds, and never leave the island.
Very well done. Absolutely threading the needle. And so we're taking these old stories of Greek mythology and we're very creatively tying them to modern things we can totally empathize with, are totally connected to already in ways that are actually creative, they are actually refreshed, and yet are still so creatively connected to their origins. I just, chef's kiss. It's a lot of fun. Every time there's a new reveal, like Cerberus the dog actually being a dog-type personality is just fun to live in a story.
These layering of these details, you kind of learn about the myths. It's just so refreshing and so cool. Such a great device.
Yeah, or I've just been reminded of the details that I actually have ingrained in my brain somewhere from junior high. Like, oh yeah, I did learn about Hermes and Athena and Zeus. And I go, oh, I didn't know I had the Odyssey storyline stuck in the back of my brain. But here we are. And it was just like fun to kind of unpack some of those memories again, too, as you journey through the story.
Tell me the tale, muse of that man, of many dangers he who went. We had an English teacher who made us memorize a good portion of the...
out of here.
Of the Iliad.
That's awesome. And you've still got it.
Oh, that's probably all I got.
It's more than most, man. More than me, certainly. That's great.
I think for me, one of the things that I loved in episode 4 specifically was the way that they cast Echidna, the monster mom.
Yes.
How creepy was that? Like, just like absolute mom language, mom dialogue, talking with the heroes on the train, and just sweetly and menacingly threatening them as a mom. Like, that was so good as the mother of monsters.
Classic parental move of it is way scarier when you whisper than when you yell. You know, like the tension just builds. And for me, one of my movie magic moments related to that character and the monster with her is, I think, the best choice you can make in most either monster movies or horror movies is you don't show the monster. You let the tension build. And so it was so cool to watch them run, flee, get off the train, go through St. Louis.
You hear it,
Yes, you're getting all these signs that this is not good, but we don't know what it is until we're actually up at the top of the arch, and it's the perfect reveal over the ledge of the arch. You see it just stalking up the ramp. It was such a satisfying reveal that built itself up because they took their time. They had the patience to wait and let it build for you.
And I think the little detail that I loved about that monster in particular is like they showed the mist version of that monster and the little Pomeranian runs by. Did you notice that?
Oh, no way. No, I did not get that at all.
So they hear these rumbling and crashing and growling, and then they see the security guards or whatever looking, and they just see a little Pomeranian run by.
Oh,
but then they look at it. Then they look at it from the hero's perspective, and they hear this like crunching and growling, and I thought it was so good.
I had forgotten about that.
Like a little bit of levity in the midst of that. It was that was good.
That's the right touch.
For me, the last one for the movie magic was the clash of Zeus and Poseidon at the end. What a great way. What I mean, they stuck the landing for the ending of the series. That confrontation between Percy and Zeus, and then the Zeus and Poseidon clash, that didn't happen in the book, actually.
Really?
There's a plot differentiation from the book that they don't miss the deadline. They just barely make it. Zeus's deadline of the...
Wow.
Yep. When they leave the casino, they have like a day and a half left, and they end up making it. In the series, they don't make it. They're already past the deadline, so Zeus and Poseidon are already clashing, already at war. And so it leads to this really intense moment at the end. Yes. And it's so good. The payoff is so good. I was wondering why they chose to do that, but that scene is why, and it's absolutely the right decision.
Oh, that is so cool.
I just loved it.
One of the last movie magic details for me was this was a series where you needed so much context to move forward. There's so much ground to cover. There's so much lore that exists in here already to unpack and run through. And I would say that they didn't Marvel browbeat us to death talking about the plot in the dialogue.
Right.
I am a Marvel Cinematic Universe fan. I have been since it started. But one of the things that has driven me nuts in the last few movies is like anytime the characters getting together and talking about what they got to do or where they got to go, it's just the justification of we have to explain the plot to everyone because the audience isn't going to get it.
As a part of the dialogue, 100%.
Right. And we didn't get any of that here. It's like they are going to talk about it. Otherwise, you have no idea what's going on or who these people are. They need a lot of introductions for monsters and characters and gods and goddesses. But then once they give it to you, you better have been following along because we are moving, right? And we are not going to go back to cover that same ground. We are assuming that you are smart enough and dialed in enough as an audience. They're respecting the audience enough, I think, to say, here's what you need. And here we go. You're going to be able to track with us.
Yeah, overall, the pacing of the whole series, in my opinion, was excellent. I felt like you had enough time to uptake the story and the world that this story is set in. But man, it really was efficient, moving the plot line forward. And
Agreed.
It was just a wild ride. For me, that last episode just is the chef's kiss of that principle, just showing how well they packed all that together and just really tied it up nicely.
So that's just a little movie magic of things we appreciated through Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Now we get to talk about parts of the story that we think just uniquely belong to Jesus. Areas where we see his character and God's story just on display, even as we talk about Greek mythology here together.
Yeah, I think anytime you tell a good story, there's going to be those spots of connection where we see the layers of separation kind of become thin between the gospel story and the good story in a show like this. So for me, there's a couple of these spots, but the first one is Percy, as he's going on this quest, is navigating what the status of his relationship is with his father, and is kind of reflecting on this along with his friends at multiple places in their journey. And one of them in particular is in episode 4. He's up late at night. He's thinking about what all this means. And Annabeth asks him, what doesn't make sense? And he says, well, the way the gods want us to think. He's had this experience of needing to burn an offering to get a parent's attention. He's like, I had to beat up on someone just to get my father to admit he's my father.
And he says, it's supposed to work that way.
It's not supposed to work that way. You're right. People who are close to you aren't supposed to treat you that way. And I think that this navigating his relationship, at multiple times he says, my father's never done anything for me. He's been so distant. You know, I don't know where I stand with him. He's never been there for me. That kind of questioning, at some point, a lot of us feel of maybe God's kind of toying with me. Like, what is this relationship like? The difference, I think, between what Percy is experiencing, because he does come into contact with his father. He does realize that Poseidon, his father, does care for him, does save him, does things for him, answers his requests and prayers for help, so to speak. But for us, I think that in the life of a Christian, there are those times where you wrestle with what is that status of relationship? What is that access? And that human hunger to know that I've got access to God. I know he cares for me. I know he hears me. Those are things that are real wrestles, and we have confidence from the scripture and the story of Jesus. In 1 John chapter 5 and verse 14, it says, this is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know we have what we asked of him. That's a point of connection with this story of Percy Jackson, but the gospel story goes a step beyond that. Because while I think the story of Percy and the gods and the relationship with them give legitimate reasons for us to question the gods' motives and to question whether or not they hear, whether or not they care. Whereas the gospel story, when you lay it out, you see a God who constantly cares for his children, constantly is hearing their prayers and requests, and is eager to connect and be in relationship. We can be confident that God's answer to our prayers is what is best for us. And that's where I think the gospel story goes one step further, and it's an opportunity for us for connection.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I saw this as a great theme of drawing a contrast between who the gods and goddesses of this story are and who the Heavenly Father is that we actually have as believers in Jesus. Because God's whole deal is you don't have to get any of it sorted out. Yeah. I'm here. I'm always here. I've always been here. What this drove me to was really Psalm 139, 7 through 12, where it says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you're there. You know, if I rise on the wings or I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, you're going to be there to guide me. You're going to hold me fast. You have this unending, ever-present God that is absolutely not the case in Percy Jackson's God family that he has. And we get the same thing a little bit in Annabeth's story as well, where she talks about her relationship with her godparents and says, for a while I was treated like a gift. They loved me and I knew it. And then he met a woman and they had their own kids. And to her, I wasn't a gift. I was a problem. And so I left.
Yep.
And what was interesting, quote, was it isn't the gods who think that way. It's everybody. But at least the rules are clear. And that just kind of arrested me of going, at least the rules are clear. Yep. And I was like, ooh, that does present a challenge. Because I think a lot of times in our Christian faith, we can run into that feeling of the rules just don't seem super clear.
Well, and sometimes we want them to be.
That's right.
We say, can I manipulate God into doing what I'm asking? Because, okay, the Bible says, when I pray to him, he hears me. And God is a father who wants to give his children good things. So I should be able to ask whatever. But the kicker with where we are in that 1 John 5 that I referenced is this is the confidence we have that if we ask anything according to his will. So God is not going to allow us to go into a place that is not in his will, which means is also synonymous with that's not in our best interest. That's the tension, the contrast between what Annabeth is saying, of, at least with the gods, that if you honor them, you show them respect, they'll be in your corner, right?
Yeah, there's a clear system. There's a currency that exists, and I know where I'm at in that currency. And I think there's times in our lives or in our development with God where we I know I have absolutely leaned into a bit of a more legalistic faith because it feels clearer. When I turn my relationship with God into a to-do list, I can feel like I'm doing all the right things. I'm checking all the boxes, and I can feel better about my own faith or relationship with God, which just in reality actually undermines that entire system that our faith is built upon.
Right.
It's the beauty of God's countercultural grace is that it is not a to-do list faith. This is a dynamic, living relationship. And there are these healthy rhythms and practices, but when tied to a system of currency, or even maybe, if you feel like it's like your sin barometer of like, my sin's been real bad lately, and so God thinks of me less, just couldn't be further from the truth. And so I think this story paints a great picture of these contrasts between a very conditional relationship with godly
and almost
parents.
transactional, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned currency, like, if I do these right things, then I have favor. I can spend that favor when I need it. And a lot of times we, in the legalistic sense, we sort of apply that or map that onto our relationship with God and think, man, if I do the right things, then God is going to bless me. He will do, he'll do X, Y, Z for me. When in reality, that's such a cheap version of the relationship that God offers us and wants to have with us. And he's got so much better than what we could ask or imagine.
And I think what's connected to this for me is that idea, Percy says it, of saying, your family is a mess when he gets his moment in front of Zeus. Zeus says, I will not be weakened in front of my brothers. And he says, you already are. Mm-hmm. They don't support you because they love you. They obey because they're afraid. And I just, there is such a
really
good
one.
line. We support and believe in God because we believe that he actually loves us. We don't just obey God because we're afraid, though we should have a healthy fear of who God is and how big and powerful he is, right? There's a nuance, but our faith is not based in a position of fear. And I felt that this drew that out in such a tangible and meaningful way of saying, hey, Zeus, the most powerful god in this universe, none of these people are supporting your means to an end because they actually love you or support you in your family dynamic. No, they're afraid of you and what you're going to do. And saying, how afraid do you think they'll be when your dad shows up looking to put you back in your place, right? And you're only as powerful as that power dynamic continues to exist.
No, that's really good. And that connection of the idea of connection to the godly family. There's a quote that Luke has at the end when Percy and him are coming into conflict, and we realize, Luke is actually behind this whole plot. He is the agent of, he's the agent of Kronos. But he says the gods want us to fight for them, worship them, fear them, and they couldn't care less about what we want. They're bad parents. In the ride, in the theme park, he's reflecting on that, like, this is what the gods are like. This is the kind of family that they are. They're bad parents. And I think that is a place where we see the craving of Percy and the other heroes to see this family be better, because in all of the heroes that we see, they're reflections of their godly parent. When we look at the interaction with Medusa, she's like, you can choose to be something different than your parents, or you can choose to be like your parents. And so we see this sort of interaction throughout of, are they going to fulfill this kind of ongoing enmity within their family? Are they going to choose to be different? Are they going to rise above that? And that's that desire to be true sons and daughters And I think for us, we see that desire to be called sons and daughters of God reflected in the gospel story, because we are not called to be mere puppets of God like some of the heroes in the stories of Percy Jackson are. We are not bound as slaves in fear, in obedience, like what you were talking about with Zeus. We are sons and daughters. Romans 8:15 says, "The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit that you received brought about your adoption into sonship." And by Him, by that Spirit, we cry, "Abba, Father." In another way of saying, Daddy. We've got this really close connection. We are sons and daughters, and we have that access, and we get to begin to reflect the nature of God through our sonship. And it's not one of imperfection, like in the Greek gods and Percy. It's a true reflection, the truest reflection of who we are, because of the beauty and the purity and the overwhelming holiness and perfection of God.
And that takes me right into my next one, of part of a story that belongs to Jesus here, is really how and why God continues to shape us into disciples, as people who are actively following Jesus, right? Just people who are learning from him and growing to be more like him on an everyday basis. We see this in Percy's relationship with his mom early on. Mom really kind of plays this formative, almost Holy Spirit type character to Percy early, protects him early in his childhood to keep him from kind of all these influences of the gods who are going to move him in all these different directions and use him really as a puppet. She's protecting him, and there's a line that says, maybe she was preparing you so when you ran into us, you'd be different than us. And for me, I go, wow, what a great example of us living as Jesus followers in our world. We have the opportunity to be different than the rest of the world in a really positive, transformative way, being this blend of authenticity and optimism that's rarely found. And you see that Percy continues to upend the expectations of the gods and this entire family dynamic, this family dysfunction they have going on because of that. And man, that is so true, I find, of people who love Jesus. They upend people's typical expectations. Their plans succeed and work, certainly because God can do anything, but really they are so counterculture at their best in a way that is so healthy and attractive and transformative. It's a winning combination. I just get excited about it.
Yep, that strikes a chord within me of remembering like a passage out of Romans 12. Do not be conformed by the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So, that idea of pushing up against or resisting the patterns and the practices of this world, just like what we saw Percy do, Percy's resistance to the scramble for power and glory above all else, and his willingness to make the sacrifice play over being self-serving, I think is a real connection point with the gospel story of Jesus, because there's this idea of eat or be eaten, power and glory, and nothing else matters. That's a theme that runs through. I remember when we see Ares in that diner and he's talking with the heroes, he's saying, yeah, this is who we are. This is our family. We betray. We backstab. We push each other down a flight of stairs just to get ahead. I also remember there's a part where that image of pushing down a flight of stairs comes up again. You remember when Percy picked Annabeth to go on the quest?
Yes.
And he's like, I picked you because you'd be willing
you'd be the most likely to push me down the stairs if I need you to for the sake
Yes.
of the quest, right? If you needed to do it, I know you would.
Yeah.
What a great connection. Yes.
That image comes up a couple of times, but it is an image that sort of represents the attitude of and what it means to be a part of that family and the scramble for power and glory over one another. When Percy is in the ride that Hephaestus built and he's got to sit down in the chair and make the sacrifice play so that they can get the shield so the quest can continue, Annabeth is shocked by this. This changes something in her, and that has a ripple effect. That unwillingness to conform to this pattern changes something.
Right, because I think she has the line, she's like, he isn't that way, he's better than that, I don't want to be that way anymore, I don't want to be like any of you anymore, and I just won't do it. And Hephaestus, one of the gods himself, who's the witness to this kind of transformative moment, he looks away, plays a little melody on the flute, and unlocks the chair and turns and says, some of us don't like being that way either.
It has a ripple effect.
Annabeth, right? Yeah. It made me think of those who are in a family that does not love Jesus, but you suddenly do. You know, I have this dysfunction in my family. I have this messiness in my family. Now I've created almost more discomfort or more chaos because I'm suddenly in a different place and God's working in my life and transforming me. And there are these ripples that happen both positive, but also in some very uncomfortable ways in our family dynamics of saying, I'm not going to be like this anymore. I'm going to embrace a different way of living. God has inspired or redeemed or transformed these things where I'm going to start moving in a different direction. There are some relationships where people are like, I don't want to be a part of whatever it is that you're a part of now. And knowing in Percy's instance, he is still doing the right thing, but it is causing distance and separation from a known entity or system that already exists because you are intentionally choosing, in this case, what's very practically from our perspective as the audience, better. There's a lot kind of wade through and all that, but it really is for me going, hey, you enter into a relationship with Jesus. It's the best thing in the world, but it does create sometimes just as many tensions as it does beauty and opportunities and holding on to these truths of saying God does have my best interests in mind, supported by what we've talked about already. Like God loves me, he sees me, he knows me, he cares for me. And it reminds me of Luke 12:48, where it goes, everyone who's been given much, much will be demanded. And from those who've been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. And it's a quote from Luke, not the Apostle Luke, but Luke and, Percy and the Olympians here of, you didn't ask to be a half-blood, but you are one. It makes you a part of something bigger than yourself. You stepped into a relationship with Jesus. It makes you a part of something bigger than yourself. And this reality of as you grow in your relationship with Jesus, all of these wonderful things are going to happen in your life and you get this wonderful relationship, but more will continue to be entrusted to you because God loves you. But it also means you have these new responsibilities as you grow in your character and your integrity and the depth of your walk with Jesus as well. And that can be just as challenging as it is rewarding.
I think that those moments when Percy does, as you're talking about, go against the grain, breaks away from those patterns, we see him be a reflection, I think, of Jesus in those moments. His willingness to go against the climb and the scramble for power and glory and actually be willing to make sacrifices, be willing to stay loyal in the face of what he might lose in as a result of that. I think that's where we see a little bit of this reflection of Jesus for sure.
Well, let me throw this one at you, right? If we really want to go in that direction, you have gods and goddesses who are of one type, but then you have a demigod who is what? Part God, part man, part human, right? He's living in both worlds of this, right? And when the temptation of all his God-like, etc. show up, he's had the development of a human mother who's kept him grounded and true to these better principles and better parts. And I go, boy, that sounds still very different, but a lot like Jesus, like you are carrying both of these things. He has this 100%. Godlike power and perspective, but also has all of the real human experience, empathy, sympathy, and actually knows what it's like to be us.
When we look at Percy in these moments of kind of representing both of these worlds, but doing something different, in many places we see in the gods and heroes scramble for power, climbing the ladder. In order to ascend to their thrones into these places of glory, they're willing to step on other people. They're willing to backstab, betray, push people down a flight of stairs. But where we see Percy be kind of a reflection and a hint, I think, at Jesus is he's willing to make the sacrifice play. He's willing to take the fall, so to speak.
More than once in this story.
Yes, and Jesus, rather than climbing those steps, he descends them from his throne to be a part of our world. And Philippians 2 says that we're to be reflections of that. In your relationships one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And I think we see a reflection of that willingness to take the path of humility, that willingness to become like us, that Percy gives us a chance to speak into. We see a God who's not wanting to climb this ladder and step on us on his way to power and glory, but leaves it behind in order that he can be near to us.
Okay, so that's where we see God on display in Percy Jackson in the Olympians. But after all of that, Simon,
So what?
So what can we actually do with this on the other side? And one for me was just how I'm approaching my parenting, even with a 1.5-year-old right now. How can I be fully present? How can I love unconditionally? And that will look uniquely different, season to season, month to month even. I am sure. But already I'm just thinking about that quote that Percy said to Zeus of saying, they follow you because they fear you, not because they love you. And I want my kids to follow me, not because they fear me, because they know how much I love them. They're going to trust me, they're going to trust my judgment, and they're going to believe that I am safe enough, that I am worthy of being followed. And I think the dynamic change there is that I have a responsibility in that. My kids can't just do what I say because I said so. My kids can't just do what I said because, quote, I am the parent. Although I'm sure that is a line that I will use at some time. I have no doubt in my mind. But all that to say, I do have a unique responsibility of building the foundation of trust and love in their lives, that they're going to choose to follow me because I am actually safe. I have shown up before. I have been there before. I have set the precedent that I am a trusted person to be connected to be followed. And so I think we absolutely have an opportunity to reflect out of this and go, hey, am I building trust? Am I communicating love actively in a way that's building bonds and bridges and consistent reminders to my kids to know just how much they are loved unconditionally? And I think that is such a part of God's character for us, that we have the opportunity and responsibility to give, in some ways, as a gift to our kids.
We know that our role as parents has vast implications on that relationship and expectation or image that they have of God initially. It's inherited from us and impacted by the relationship we build with them, for sure. I think the other opportunity that Percy Jackson offers us, particularly with the intended audience of this series being more along the lines of teenagers, there's competition in our culture, in our world, for power, glory, success, fame.
Yeah, competition in our own
all
hearts
those things.
For all this stuff.
All those types of things. And because that's the world we live in, there will be opportunities that in the pursuit of some of those things, which are not bad things in and of themselves, but there will be opportunities to step on someone to get there. There will be opportunities and temptations to push someone down a flight of stairs in order to gain your own advantage. And I think that Percy, his actions and his example that has an impact on the other characters in the story here gives us an opportunity to point to Jesus and say, that may be how the world works, but when you follow Jesus, the path to glory is actually through humility and self-sacrifice. And I think that that's such an important opportunity and lesson for us to be able to take a story that is fleshing out this hero and be able to point that to Jesus and to drive that into the practical choices that our kids, our teens are faced with, so that rather than taking those opportunities to ascend at the expense of someone else, they may actually choose to take that path of humility in their pursuit to follow Jesus.
Yeah, and I think something that's so interesting that just brought to my mind was the reward in Percy's story, and I think the reward in ours as followers of Jesus is often that we've built real relationships. You see at the end of this, Percy has authentic, real people present in his life because he's invited them in and along on the real side of his story. He's friends with Annabeth and Grover, and he's grown in his relationship with his mom, and then now has a relationship with his dad. And I think when we pursue humility and we pursue becoming more Christ-like, it invites authentic, real relationships rather than if we're going to game our way through, if we're going to power our way through the system, we're going to look back and say, hey, I gained XYZ, but I probably missed a lot of relationships and connection along the way. I know there's a common phrase that it's lonely at the top, and it can be lonely at the top, even in healthy situations. But when we have just, clawed our way up there, shoving people down beneath us, there isn't anybody left up there but me. And so I just think about, even in my own life, as I have pursued more vulnerability, more authenticity and tried to invite people into that in uncomfortable ways, both for me to be in people's lives more authentically, but also to let some people in. That has resulted in relationships that I have both been able to, I hope, contribute to in some healthy ways, but really that I have desperately needed at different times.
Sure.
That would not be there if I hadn't approached life probably with more of a lens focused on the character of Jesus than maybe just the things that I want.
Yeah.
At my
something
best.
Something I really like that you said when you scramble for that power, for that glory, is lonely. Because I think we know that that's an empty form of glory. When we choose the path of humility and imitate Christ, that is the true sense of glory. And if we want our kids to not grasp on empty glory in exchange for what God is offering as the truest sense of glory, then the decisions we need to encourage them in, the practice we want to drive into them is that when you have that choice to step on or choose humility, that hopefully they will choose humility.
And now we come to a newer segment of our show, Love It or Leave It, where we get to talk about what we loved and what we could have done without along the way. Simon, here's my first one for you. I'm going to throw it out there. Love it or leave it. This Pan subplot that's existing in this story, I feel like this might matter later, or maybe it's connected to the books, but for me as a non-reader viewer, I go, what's with the goat people?
Yeah.
What is happening
The lost,
here? So
the lost
I
God.
might have shown my cards a little bit there, but love it or leave it. This Pan goat subplot we got rumbling in the distance here.
I'll give this one to you. I love this. It helps me that I know where this is going. But
okay.
I, without ruining too much, if we see this series continue, there's a moment in this book that is one of my favorite moments.
Oh, there's a payoff. Okay.
Of maybe the entire series. And I think it's maybe one of the richest interactions with the gospel story. I won't ruin it now.
Wow, what a setup. That's a sell.
It's good. So I 100% love that they're bringing this in already. And if we get multiple seasons into this, I'm confident that even if you say leave it now, you will love it later. That's what I say.
I love it. Let the record stand from the book reader that it is a love it, and I am currently a leave it, but time will tell.
All right, so I've got this one for you. Love it or leave it. In the diner, Ares starting a fight on Twitter.
I love it. I love everything about it because it's subtle enough that he is the god of war, and he's like, no better war than the internet, Just like, it's perfect. I think that is a chef's kiss of like threading the creative needle of like, of course he's the god of war. Of course, he probably was behind the whole idea of what Twitter is, Yeah. Oh, that just feels absolutely right. That is a full send every time. All right, this is also going to play into how I know you a little bit in this question.
All right.
So, Lin-Manuel Miranda with established screen time, not just a cameo that we got here at the end of episode 3. Love it or leave it, him playing a role.
I was okay with how they portrayed him in this.
Okay.
We actually see the most compassion out of one of the gods and the most care or concern for their children out of one of the gods to this point. I liked how they did that. I have no idea what the costume department was doing in putting him in like sweatpants. Why was he wearing?
In the middle of this casino.
This
he
opulent
runs the place.
Yes, opulent casino. He is one of the Greek gods. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Supposed to be striking a very impressive figure.
Yeah.
And he's
Ares
wearing...
gets an awesome leather jacket. He gets a motorbike. I saw him and I'm like, I don't even want to ride a motorcycle, but I do now. He looks great.
What does him wearing like comfies in the casino have to do with any connection to his character as the god of travelers, the god of like? I don't get it. I don't get it. All right, here's mine. Another zoning in on a god character, Hephaestus, god of the forge. Love it or leave it in terms of how he was portrayed.
I'm leaving it just because I was looking for more there, a little more engagement or a little bit more of villainy or a little bit more of maybe like playing off the stereotypes of his character. I feel like it was more like this could have been anyone who was moved by a speech and unlocked a chair.
Okay, ask me that same question.
Okay. Simon, love it or leave it. Hephaestus in his screen time here in Percy Jackson, the Olympians.
leave it. Nope.
Okay, I thought you were going to absolutely upend me there. Wow, okay.
Let me tell you why.
Soapbox Corner with Simon
Hephaestus
Campbell.
is described as god of the forge, okay? He is responsible for crafting the bolts of power, the lightning bolts of power for Zeus, right? He's supposed to be responsible for some of the most powerful, most deadly weapons in the universe.
All right, okay, great.
When we see him in this series, he looks like a tinker. He plays a flute. What is going on here?
So too
Do you
subversive.
See the character being in a forge in the heart of a volcano, mastering and building powerful weapons? No,
He's outsourced
I don't
this.
see that
Yeah.
character. This is like a watchmaker. I just didn't see the god of the forge there.
And so ends Campbell's crusade on this character.
Crusade. I'm sensing a theme with a lot of mine around some of the gods' characters, but I'm interested for this for you. Love it or leave it, Hades vibe.
I feel like I haven't gotten enough of him yet. The casual nature of him was really appealing to me, and I think that's connected to my inner childhood of Hercules. When we had the Hercules cartoon and Hades really kind of playing this laid back, go with the flow, kind of
Nonchalant,
salesman, nonchalant. The sarcasm of him has one of my all-time favorite villains, and so that aligned in a way that lended itself towards my probably inner child and already like some of my associations. But I love the whole thing of playing off like, I'm not interested in this. But there's this undertone of like, but he is, right? He can play the game. You know that he's been in it. There's some credibility even in his type. And so I like that he looked slick. I like that he looked calm, collected. He knows how this works. He knows how to play his cards. I think that's a love it. I thought it was great. So at the end of the series, we get one last return of Dionysus, played by Jason Mantzoukas. And my last one for you is Love It or Leave It, with Jason playing Dionysus in this role here.
Love it. Love it. And the constant mispronunciation of Percy's name is in the books, and he delivers it perfectly. He's the perfect person to be
that's
like,
so good.
No, I'm pretty sure your name is Peter. No, I'm pretty sure I know my own name. I don't even care. Like, he does that perfectly, and he has enough of the madness, strangeness.
He's got the crazy eyes in the perfect way.
Yeah. The only person that I could be like, okay, maybe this person could do it even more would be Jack Black. Imagine really Jack Black as Dionysus.
That's a really good comparative
He even has
there.
he has a little bit more of the figure that we would expect from from Dionysus.
Basically the gluttony god. Yeah, I pick up what you're laying down there. Yeah.
But also just crazy out of his mind. Yeah. So like that would be the only one I'm like, would Jack Black be a better Dionysus? I'm not sure, but I do love this.
Well, Simon, all good things must come to an end, including this episode.
Thanks again for joining us. We hope you had as much fun with this as we did, and we do hope you're walking away with some things that you can take away that are connecting with Jesus and an opportunity for maybe some spiritual conversations with those that you might be watching this with.
And we would love to keep the conversation going because we know we covered some deep, tangenty territory here, but we know there's all sorts of other good stories and awesome nuances to keep diving into that we probably missed completely. And we would love to talk about your thoughts, insights, questions. We've had some great conversations with you already in a couple different areas, but we would love to engage with you on our Instagram at All Good Stories Podcast.
And remember, all good stories belong to Jesus.
And if you give your story to Jesus, you can be sure he'll make it a good one.